Keith Livingston here from Healthy Intelligent Training. This week I'm talking with Bernie Kelly from Ouyen in the far north of West Victoria, who didn't start running until he was 29 years old. Bernie's 67 now and still keeps in good shape by training with the Central Murray Football League umpires every week. Bernie was a familiar figure in the distance running scene in Victoria in the 1980s, and like his good friend Damien Cook, who I talked to several weeks ago, his story confirms that anyone who is prepared to put the aerobic training hours in can keep on improving to a very high level. Remarkably, Bernie achieved Australian marathon representation while training on his own in the remote community of Ouyen, largely self-coached. Over to you, Bernie.
I'm retired, and consequently I've got a little bit more time to do a bit of running, and I'm probably doing about 70 odd K a week. I run quite often with the football guys here. We've got the coach of the Ouyen Football Club. He actually just lives over the road from us. Last Saturday morning we ran from my place here in Ouyen out to his brother's place, and that was a 17k run. So he actually handled that quite well. He's pretty keen on fitness, and for someone who's not actually a runner, as you would know, to handle a 17k run just straight off like that is pretty good.
I imagine you got a lot of good training around there, in the Mallee Scrub.
I did, as most know, from those days, I did nearly all my training here. Certainly in the early days, the tracks were always fairly soft, fairly sandy. Often there was routes I'd do where it was a little bit hilly, but to do actual hill work, I really had to sort of do fartlek over about a 10 mile course and run every little hill, whether it was, they weren't all that big, but I ran every little hill flat chat. So I got in pretty good sessions that way. I didn't really get to do real hill work until I trained at the Dandenongs with the guys down there at Falls Creek, and that run down there on a Sunday, the 30 odd K run, was very, very hard. But I got stuck into it down there. I did the run down there quite a lot. And then, of course, later on, I did go up to Falls Creek a few times and did a lot of solid running up there. Went over to New Zealand to the road relays one year with Q Camberwell, and was always sort of amused when we went to New Zealand because you'd read the description of the course, and there was this little sentence saying, "Oh, the course is predominantly flat." Well, of course, was at Christchurch, and geez, there wasn't a bloody inch of flat ground on the course, I don't think.
Was that the Takahita Akaroa?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that's a mongrel course. It's hilly as anything.
but I said we were amused that they were describing this course as flat. But that was a fair introduction to hill running. So I think we took over a fairly decent team. We had the likes of Ray Wilson and Martin Stock, Peter Mitchell. Those guys were all pretty handy runners, but
very handy. Yeah.
Yeah, but we I don't think Glenn Huntley used to go over there quite a lot, but that year that I went there, they weren't there. But I think we performed pretty well, but it was a pretty tough event. So I think coming back from there and getting back to the tracks around Ouyen with the training there, was a huge difference, of course. But as you know, in the running game, if you do the hill work, you do the speed, and you do the miles, it's all in the bank in the end.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now that brings me to my next question: is who coached you?
No, well, I didn't have a coach. I did what I did um, by myself. Basically, I, as most people know, and I've discussed with you a little bit before, I got into running from football. So I came up here to Ouyen. I was secretary and played for a club called Kiamal, which was 8K out of Ouyen, just towards Mildura. I did the league secretary's job for 4 or 5 years, and in the end, I got a little bit sick of it, and so I gave it away, and that was in about '82, and then I ran my first marathon, which was my first race as well, in the Adelaide Marathon in '82. And a guy called Barry Kimber, who used to run for Glen Huntley, he was up here just out of Teachers College. He and Russell Parsons, keen runner and a keen sports person. He was actually the head sports teacher at the Ouyen High School. He mainly talked me into running the Adelaide Marathon, so I came straight off. Footy. I did some long runs with these guys. I probably did about 3 or 4 30Ks with them in a month or two leading up to Adelaide. And the first 30K I went with them, I got dropped by them about, I think about 15K or something like that. And I couldn't hardly run another inch, and I had to run home. So I had a real tough introduction to long runs. Anyway, I persevered. I got over to Adelaide, and I knew I was talking about sort of pace before the game, before the race, with a few guys, and I knew from my involvement with the Richmond Football Club when I was league secretary, because we were in their zone, and I got to know the Richmond guys, the officials at Richmond, pretty well, and they said that there was, when they did their time trials around the tan, they said that not many of the footballers could break or run 2 6-minute miles back to back. And I thought, oh, geez, I thought if a guy runs 6-minute mile pace for a marathon, they must be up there with a shot of winning. And these guys over in Adelaide said no. They said, if you run that pace, you won't see which way the leaders went. And of course, that was the case over in Adelaide. I didn't even see the leaders at all. It was a mass start, of course, and started at the back. I had this preconceived idea that I wanted to run the whole race without stopping, but I got to about 35K, and that was it. I couldn't run another step, so I ran the last 7K and crawled over the line. And Russell Parsons, the guy who I'd mentioned earlier, came up to me at the finish, and I said, "Oh well, I said that's it for me." I said, "If this is what you feel like after marathons," I wasn't going to run another one. I sort of, after a couple of weeks, I started to feel a bit better. That's when I got that book, the book of marathon running, I think, and it had a breakdown of all the times, sub 3 hours, sub 250, sub 230, sub 220, all that. And I really just followed what went on in that, what the guy said in that book.
Manfred Stepney, marathoning.
Because I'd walked and ran in Adelaide, I just sort of figured that if I actually ran all the way in Melbourne, even if it was slow, I sort of figured that I could run about 3:30 for some reason. Anyway, that's what I did in Melbourne. I didn't stop and I ran 3:28. Then I sort of thought, oh, well, that wasn't too bad at all. And then I sort of started to eye off 3 hours. So I just basically followed the book again. I went to Stawell. Stawell Marathon was a good country marathon. That was only a couple of hours drive from up here in Ouyen. I ran 2:58 there, so I broke 3 hours the first time I tried. I sort of read about if you run under 2:50, you qualified for the Boston Marathon. So I upped the ante again, ran more miles, basically running more miles. No speed work much. I didn't really have a clue on speed work at that stage. No, I went to Adelaide, after that, and just with the aim of breaking 2:50, and that race in Adelaide remains the easiest marathon I've ever ran. I was only looking for 2:50, as I said. I got the 30K, and I was just doing it so easy. I just couldn't believe it, and I took off, and I ended up running 2:46, and I thought, gee, this is all right. Then I went to the Melbourne Marathon a couple of months after that. So another trip to the Melbourne Marathon. And of course, the goal was 2:40. I'd ran 3:28 there the year before, but now I was shooting for 2:40 the next year. So I ended up running 2:38. Very pleased with that. I sort of thought, oh, gee, that's pretty starting to get pretty solid, because when you got under 2:40, I think you just about got in the top 40 or 50 of the Melbourne Marathon then. Then I just targeted 2:30, and that's probably when I started to have a few hiccups. My first attempt at breaking 2:30 was again at Stawell, and I ran about 2:33, but I still ran a PB, so I was reasonably happy. Then I had another go at the state championships in Melbourne, and I ran about 2:32. But I thought that was an interesting race, because I got in with a group, and then I actually had a real lot of trouble sticking on the pace up to 15K, and then I was sort of gone, really. I was ready to back off the pace, and I did in fact back off the pace a few K later. And then a guy, Saul Bacatus, who used to run for Q Camberwell, he came streaming past me, and I thought he was just sprinting. He was going that fast. He seemed to be going that fast. Anyway, I knew that I was a better, faster runner than him, and I just tacked on behind him. I was gone for all money, I thought, and I tacked on behind him, and within a few K, I came good, and I ended up running about 2:32, and I thought straight after that, the finish, I thought, geez, I thought I didn't run well at all, I thought, and I ran 2:32. Graham Kennedy won that race, I think, in about 2:16 or 2:17. Then I went back to Adelaide. I reckon I was in pretty good shape then for Adelaide. Another crack at trying to break 2:30. I didn't have any trouble in that race. It was Adelaide State Championship, so they invited 4 or 5 guys from each state over there, and I was on time right through my splits. 5K, 10K, halfway. I was on time, and I got to about 35K, and I was well under 2:30 pace, and I ended up running 2:28. Steve Poulton, I remember he won in about 2:19.
Steve Poulton from New South Wales. Yeah, he was a very, very good marathon. Yeah.
Breaking 2:30 was big for me. About another 3 months, of course, Melbourne was on again. I sort of had eyes on running a PB and doing around about 2:25 and trying to get in the top 10. I did start to do speed work when I was trying to break 2:30. Greg McMahon, I think the Glen Huntley guys would know.
Yeah, I know Greg. Yep.
I think he was about a 350 or thereabouts, 1500 metre runner. Came from Melbourne straight out of teachers college, and he went to Mildura. He told me quite a lot. He told me, well, you should be doing quarter mile intervals, and you should be doing mile intervals out on the road. So I said, oh, what sort of time? And he said, oh, well, you want to be able to be do 2 or 3 mile intervals at about 5-minute pace, and then on the track, aim for 8 quarters and 68, 67 with only minimal recovery. So I think I started to do that then. And when I went to Melbourne, gunning for 2:25, I had it in my mind that I wanted to run 2:25 on race day. As Damien said to you the other day in his interview, there was always a group of guys of around about 2:20 pace or a bit better. There was probably about 8 or 9 or maybe up to a dozen of us. So in Melbourne, you had nearly all those guys in the race, 85, 86. There was a group of us about 6 or 7, maybe 8, gunning for 2:20 or thereabouts. And I remember getting to about 15k, 20k, something like that. And we were going up and down these little rises in one of these back streets, and I didn't even hardly know where we were in Melbourne. I didn't know hardly anything about the place. All those guys knew where we were, and what the course was like. And I just all of a sudden I had trouble hanging on to them. I couldn't. I thought I was gone again. I thought it was the second time that I thought I was gone in a marathon. I just couldn't keep up, I thought. And I hung off the back of them. But I thought, oh, well, if I'm going to finish in the top 10, I've got to hang on to these guys. I wasn't sort of concerned that there was still another 20k to go. For some reason, I never worried about that. I never looked at it that way. And so I hung on, and then the next thing I ran over the top of all of those guys. And I just come good within a few K. And then we went down, got into St Kilda Road. I was by myself, and guys were yelling out, "Oh, you 11th and 12th, or 12th and then 11th, and then 10th." And I picked up a few guys in the home KSO, and I came up to the clock, and it was 2:25, and I ended up getting 9th. Came away from that tickled pink about it, for walking around as proud as punch for a couple of weeks, I think. About that time, I ran into Peter Mitchell. Peter was a guy who I'd always read. I'd read his name, read his results in the running magazines, and I thought, oh, this guy's in winning these races, and he must be a bloody good runner. And we were talking I was talking with a few guys after the Melbourne Marathon, and this guy said, oh, he'd ran such and such and such and such, and I said, oh, what's your name? And he said, oh, Peter Mitchell. I said, I've been reading about you for years in the books, but never met you. Peter and I ended up pretty much best mates in running. Pete went on to win the Gold Coast Marathon. He beat Pat Carroll. He ran 2:14.59, qualified for the World Championships. I ran my PB 2:20.15. I got 4th in that race. Pete won. Pat Carroll was 2nd. Japanese guy was 3rd, and I was 4th. Then that sort of set the path for, I think, a trip overseas, and that's how when I went over to Taiwan with Damien, I wasn't all that interested in going overseas, interestingly enough. Um, and when the trip was offered to me to Taipei, I I rang up Chris Wardlaw, and he said, take the trip. So I did, and then of course Damien rang me up, and he said he was going. Damien and I were both in pretty good shape. When I got off the plane over there, so the pollution was really bad. I thought, gee, I'm not going to run much of a time here. A lot of the guys who were better than the likes of myself and Damien and a few others, Morris Hearn, he was a good runner in those days. The guys who went overseas to these trips never really ran all that well. So I sort of thought, oh, well, I don't know that I'm going to be really going for much of a time here. And then Damien arrived and we had a talk, and he said, oh, he was going for the time. So I said, oh, all right, I'll be with you too. We lined up at the start, and we had had the national anthem just in front of the outside of the town hall. We had explicit instructions over in Taiwan from the organisers. You've got to stand still with your arms down beside your side and not be moving around. The gun went, and I pretty much got in with a group of guys. I felt fairly comfortable because the actual they had martial law in over at Taipei at the time, and the police and the army actually blocked off all the streets, so the pollution wasn't a factor at all on the day, and that was a real positive. So we went through halfway in about 69 something, and I was feeling pretty comfortable. We got to about 30k, and I was actually leading this group, and we were probably equal fourth behind the leader, and but I was comfortable. I went into the drinks. There was a drink station at about 30k, I remember, and I just veered off to grab a cup of water, scoffed it down, and I thought, oh, this is my last drink. This is it now. We've got to get going now. And I just looked up, and these guys had put 10 metres on me in a matter of a minute or so, and I just couldn't get them back, no matter how hard I tried. And I sort of had, I sort of thought, oh well, I've got to hang in, and I got to about 40k, and I passed a couple of Japanese guys, and I didn't slow down all that much, but I was struggling. I passed Ito about, I think about 35k, and he'd actually ran about it. He'd qualified for the Olympics over 10k, and I think he'd ran about 27:40 for 10k. I went past him, and then I went past an East German guy, got up to about 40k, and I hadn't even given Damien a thought. And next thing, he came past me, streaming past me, and we got to about, I suppose, about 500 metres or so from the finish, and then I mustered up another go, and I came past him, and I was only, I suppose, I held that position. I didn't really worry about Damien being behind me at that time, because we're only about 200 or 300 metres from the finishing line. And I thought, oh, well, I wasn't going to improve my position, and we were running about 2:21 pace. And so I waved out to the crowd with about 50 metres or so to go, and Damien had, in the meantime, been looming up behind me. He out-sprinted me to the line. So he he came like a damn bullet, actually, at the end. I thought, oh, that's it. I'm not bothered anymore.
It's happened to Steve Ovett once.
Yeah. 88, I ran the Melbourne Marathon again. Realistically, I had about four or five good shots at running under 2:20. I had the one in Taiwan, which I've just said, I had the Gold Coast, which I was only 15 seconds off of, and I probably had I definitely had Melbourne a couple of times, but the last time I I thought that I had a good shot at it. That was about 88, I think, right at about 10k, and I think I sort of had intent to really go for it that day. So I think we went through 10k in about 32 minutes. We went through halfway in about 68:43, and I was actually leading the group there. I felt all right at that stage, but another 10k later, I didn't feel too flash at all, and I hung on then. And Morris, of course, went on to run 2:18, and I think I ran about 2:22, and I got about 9. In hindsight, I went through halfway in a few races a little bit too quick. In that race in Melbourne, if that 68:43 was more like 69:15, 69:20 or something, half a minute or so slower, I think that would have made a lot of difference, but wasn't to be.
You did extremely well anyway, given your start and where you were training. Before you're talking about how Greg McMahon had got you to do intervals on the track. Was there
Yes,
a track in Ouyen that you could
yes.
use?
You know, I did all my track work at the high school track here, but of
Oh,
course it was a grass track, and the back straight was actually uphill, which people who are non-runners wouldn't realise that. But as you would know, if you're running 65-second quarters, you know if there's any little hills in a track. And the
mm.
track was actually only about 330 metres, so I had to run the 330 metres plus 70 metres to get my times for the quarters. I did a track session with Mona one day down in Ballarat. We did eight quarters, and with only about 200 recovery jog in between. And I got a good taste of just what that was like. And I remember Mona saying on that day that it's not so much, you're going at a fair pace, but he said the big thing is the short recovery. The recovery was only, 25 odd seconds, I reckon. Might have been 30 odd 5-second jog, which wasn't much at all. But I kept the intervals going up here in Ouyen, and probably Saturdays I used to do a 16k run over a hilly sandy course, but I'd push up every hill, and I ran the whole lot fairly fast. Um, sometimes you think you probably pushed a bit too hard in training sometimes, but I knew that once you started looking at faster times, you had to run fast in training. Well, at least two times, maybe three times a week. That's basically what I did, and I learned a lot from the likes of Mona. I learned a lot from Peter Mitchell, Greg McMahon. Um, John Duck was another guy in those days who used to give me a fair bit of advice, because he'd got second in the Adelaide Marathon when I ran it the first time. He was a country guy, so I learned a lot when we went up to Falls Creek. You come away from those things and you learn a fair bit, especially Keith, that the fact that I wasn't in running as a kid. I I went to a Catholic school. We didn't do running, so
Probably only football and cricket, maybe.
that's exactly right. And even to play footy, I mean, I loved footy in those days, but to play footy, we had to give up half our lunch hour on a Friday to get about an hour sport. I didn't have the experience of coming up through running at school. I don't know whether I mentioned it earlier on, but I didn't actually run. When I ran that Adelaide Marathon, I was 29. So I got into it very late, but I sort of often think that I would have liked to have gotten into it earlier, but with footy, that just didn't happen.
You're still fit and active and doing the
Yeah,
umpiring and training and keeping well.
but I do a lot of running still. I'll do 10K, I'll warm up for about 10 minutes, and I do about 15 by 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off of intervals. And I do train, 60 or 70K a week.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Bernie, to catch up.
And I say hi to my son Jared, who's over in Perth.